said that we could record them and that we would make it available later. Thanks for the reminder, Gavin. I almost forgot. Okay, and so with that, unless there's something burning that came up in the chat, I think we can get started. So, Kara, you can share your screen now. I allowed for that to happen.
All right. Okay, thanks, Erin and Gavin and everybody at Parks Conservancy who organized this and everybody who is attending. Looks like we have a pretty good turnout for kind of nice evening, so thank you. And this is actually our first public-ish presentation on this project, so go easy on us. But we hope to give you a broad overview. I'm going to do about 1/3 kind of bigger picture project overview, and then we'll do questions, as Erin said. And then James will get into the rest of the 2/3 of the presentation of some of the technical stuff that we're delving into. So this is a joint project between the Water and Sewer Authority and the City of Pittsburgh, Department of City Planning. It's our development codes and their stormwater infrastructure that development impacts. So it makes sense that it's a joint project. And Erin's already introduced us, but James is the sustainability manager at PWSA, and I am environmental planner in city planning. And I think there might be some other people on the project team on the call. I just want to call out Marty Battistone. She's city planning's stormwater management plan reviewer, as well as many other things. So hi, Marty. And I think I saw Tom Petroni on here too, and he's part of the consultant team. Is there anyone else? Do we have anybody else from the project team? So we have a great team led by AKRF. They're sort of interdisciplinary engineers, and they're a firm from Philly, and they've done a lot of similar projects. They worked on Philly's code update and other East Coast cities with their similar projects. Now we know that Pittsburgh is not Philly. We have a lot of differences, but I think that some of our, of course, AKRF is aware of that, and we have a lot of local subs too on the team, which are shown in bold here. So can everybody see my screen? Okay. So why are we doing a stormwater code update? First of all, we are doing a stormwater code update because we have to have these codes in place. There are a number of federal, state, and local regulations that we have to comply with. They're all sort of under the broader umbrella of the Clean Water Act that began in the 70s, that have gone through various stages of implementation with the NPDES, non-pollutant discharge elimination system, erosion and sediment control requirements, and down to the most recent and specific that we've had to comply with is state and then onto county Act 167. So we did sort of a first phase of code updates that went into effect in March of last year. And that was specifically to comply with the Allegheny County Act 167 model ordinance. So there were some areas where Pittsburgh's existing code was already stricter than the county model ordinance. And in that case, we kept those higher standards. But there were other areas where we had to tighten up our code, such as requiring green infrastructure as the preference for stormwater management wherever feasible, and the introduction of stream buffers, and some other things like that. But there are other regulations that we need to comply with too. And then we don't just care about regulations, we care about, why are we actually doing this? It's because there's a lot of stormwater management needs. And as it says on the bottom, effective stormwater management is important. I'm sure I don't need to get into all that with this group. but also needs have changed in recent decades. There's more urban development in Pittsburgh, and that's sort of another difference too between the county model ordinance, which is geared towards a little bit more of a rural or suburban setting. The city, of course, has urban development, and that means a lot of times greater impervious area, which increases stormwater runoff, and potentially big new developments with more pressure on the sewer system. And also from climate change, of course, we've seen more frequent and intense storms that keep shifting, and the engineers keep having to figure out how to deal with those intensifying storms. And so the goals, just some of the goals, are to reduce flooding. You know, it's not just in the floodplains that we see flooding, it's all throughout Pittsburgh. There's localized flooding, basement backups, I'm sure you're all familiar. And a distributed stormwater management system, such as would be required by code, is important in helping to reduce flooding and also reducing combined sewer overflows. Even if Alcosan builds some giant tunnels in the next coming decades, a distributed stormwater management system will help. And reducing water pollution and increasing water quality is an important goal. And another important goal is to improve the clarity of our codes and simplify our processes. Probably some of you on this call have had to work with our codes, and you may know that there are sort of different pieces of what you need to comply with in different areas of the code. So that's really an important point, that we may make things a little bit stricter in terms of the regulations, but hopefully it will ultimately make developers and designers happy if we can clarify the requirements and the process, because of course time is money and clarifying the process helps. So some of our overall project objectives are to update the code itself, of course. And in the last code update from March of last year, we pulled all of the, or most of the stormwater management related requirements out of the building code, Title 10, and created a new title, Title 13, with an effort to try to combine and consolidate as much of the stormwater management requirements in Title 13. Reduce conflicts and overlap in other areas of the zoning code and elsewhere, and align the requirements to the city and PWSA's overall goals, including things like using green infrastructure and various resilience and sustainability goals that the city has. And we will also be developing new technical resources for stormwater management. PWSA does have a developer's manual, but we'll be updating that as part of this process and creating a new stormwater design manual. If any of you are familiar with the Pennsylvania BMP manual, Best Management Practice Manual, you know, it's okay, but it would be great to have some more specific local guidance. And the consultants will also be providing some recommendations to improve processes, plan review, inspection, enforcement, all of these important things that we know need to happen. And also it's important to point out that this is definitely an interagency process. We have the city and PWSA, but there's also other agencies that play a role, and those include the Allegheny County Health Department, because they have plumbing code, and there's sort of a lot of confusing jurisdictional questions there. And the Allegheny County Conservation District also plays a large part in erosion and sediment control. So they are partners too. This is a broad project timeline. We're sort of in the, moving from the kickoff phase to the analysis phase right now. Kickoff phase was reviewing all of the existing codes and existing resources, interviewing agency staff, things like that. analysis phase that we're moving into now is really the bulk of the stakeholder interviews, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, and starting to evaluate improvements and possibilities. Then we'll move into synthesis, which is taking all that input and review and analysis into start to develop code recommendations. Then we'll have draft code revisions, and then develop those guidance materials once we have some sense of where we're going with the code revisions. And hopefully, if all goes well, we will roll out our new code and processes by summer of next year. So to date, we have, I sort of talked about that in the timeline already, but AKRF has interviewed staff, they've reviewed existing materials. We've done a review of recent zoning records and data and the stormwater management plans to try to assess the data and land disturbance areas from that. They've done a great job of trying to put into graphic form all the complicated system of development approval processes, which you'll see later in this presentation, and we've developed a stakeholder plan. So coming up next, more interviews, stakeholder engagement, that's a big one, and starting to analyze the potential for new policies. So to talk a little bit about the engagement plan, first of all, of course, we're in the difficult situation of engagement being a whole new virtual world that we're all embarking on right now. The plan is to have the ability to do all the stakeholder engagement virtual. We'll see. But the engagement guide generally follows city planning's public engagement guide that was approved by Planning Commission earlier this year. And I think one of the more important things of the public engagement guide, which is, by the way, for long-range planning, such as this, is being a little bit more transparent and clear about what level of engagement we're requesting and how that engagement will be used. So you can see the little graphic that shows from a level of inform, where you're just kind of telling the public what's going on, but not really asking for their feedback. And that's okay in certain projects. All the way to empower, which would be like giving the public full ability to, create their own change. So for this project, we're somewhere in the middle. For the general public, we'll be at sort of the inform level, because a lot of people aren't going to engage directly with stormwater code, but we want to let people know what's going on. And then for stakeholders and agency groups, probably groups like this one, will be at the consult or involve level, where we're actively asking for your feedback and all your experience in the codes and in stormwater management in Pittsburgh and how we can improve things. So there's going to be a series of focus group meetings and agency meetings throughout the project. Some of you may get emails from us soon. I think we have a pretty representative list of organizations that include stakeholder types like advocacy and nonprofit, like Parks Conservancy, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Tree Pittsburgh, stormwater groups, etc. Developers, architects, engineers, and contractors, of course, the people who actually have to work with the codes and implement stormwater management. Government agencies, and then community advocacy and development groups as well, such as the CDCs that review development before it gets approved. And of course, equity and diversity are always important to us. We are inviting a group of stakeholders that's representative of city demographics, racial demographics. And then additionally, if anybody wants to get involved that's not specifically invited, we would welcome that too. Feel free to reach out to James or I, and we'll have our emails on here at the end. If you'd like to have more participation in that more in-depth technical focus groups, we would welcome that. And we also welcome anybody's feedback. We would like to know how you think we can best help you participate in this. The website that we have is listed there, and you can find our stakeholder engagement plan, and we'll be posting updates and things like that throughout the process. But let us know how we can get your great ideas. James even said that he would create a TikTok if he had to. Apparently that's the thing. So we'll see. And with that, we'll pause here to see if anybody has questions about the broader project.
So Susan has asked a question. What do you expect the rollout to look like?
Good question. Good question. Well, first we have to get things approved by council before it gets into the code. But once it does get into the code, we might have a period of trial and error, of course. I think we need to think more about that. Do you have a better answer, James?
I would just, for us, at PWCA, rolling this out, really is, going to start with us getting together sort of a package of, what we hope is a, justifiable, defensible code that meets all of our regulatory requirements, as well as giving us the stormwater management the city needs. And putting that package together and then presenting that to council and presenting it to the, to the mayor's office. So they're all on board with it. And then, once it's in council, there's of course, the whole legal process of council approval that it'll have to go through with the various public, presentations and hearings in front of council. So, I mean, it's not, going to be too different than any other code change or update. It just maybe a little bit more comprehensive than what I think most folks are used to. And, hopefully, at the end of the day, we've, been able to make things more clear and understandable and easier and much more useful for everybody involved.
And it might be a multi-phase process to roll it out too, because we're hopefully going to get recommendations for additional staffing needed for inspections and enforcement. So it's not going to be as easy as like it was for the Act 167 code, where we pretty much just said, okay, now it's the law. So, okay, developers, you have to comply. It's going to be a little bit more complicated than that.
So we have two other questions in the chat, and also just a time check. It's 5:25, so folks know. Andrea Boykowitz asked, has PWSA received approval from the PUC to charge a stormwater management fee, or has there been any progress on their application? And I'll pause there.
Yeah, so PWSA has submitted a rate case for stormwater to the PUC. We've done it with their guidance and with them sort of, learning about stormwater fees as they go. This is their first. They are on board with it. A rate actually has not been requested, but we have submitted the methodology for them to review and approve of how we would collect the rates based off of impervious area square footage, because everything they currently have jurisdiction over is meter-based utilities. So this is a little different animal for them. But they're, we're working through the process with them, and so far everything has been, moving in a positive direction that will eventually come about. So their progress is moving. It's moving slowly. The goal is January of 2022, we would see a fee actually on bills going out. So a lot can happen between now and then, and a lot of work needs done still, but that's what we're shooting for.
Wonderful. And just a plug for Monday, June 29th at 6 o'clock, colleagues of James, Beth, and Rebecca will be speaking about the stormwater utility. So you can hop onto that Zoom call as well. There are here, let's see, 3 more questions. How does Alcosan's new consent decree affect this?
I would say, I mean, there's certainly some impact to, you know, what we're looking at from a combined sewer overflow projects and what needs to be done to mitigate the CSOs now that Alcosan's moving forward with the tunnel projects that are relating to their consent decree. But I think overall, I mean, Alcosan has no land use jurisdiction, which is one of the problems they have with getting stormwater management done in the right way. So it's up to the municipalities to implement the code and development regulations that they see fit for the land use and stormwater management within each municipality. So for us, you know, we're looking at this, I don't want to say as an isolated, you know, it's Pittsburgh and we can do what we want, but it's certainly something that we have to consider, you know, our needs specifically for stormwater management and the way we control land use development in the city to get the stormwater management we need out of, you know, private development as well as on our public streets and roads. Okay,
there's one statement and one more question, and then we should probably hop into James's section. John Stephen has asked, will you consider a role for registered community organizations? For example, Homewood just completed a community plan that references a need for improved stormwater management.
Kara, that sounds like you.
Yeah, I was actually gonna scroll to our stakeholder plan and see if they are on the list. Yes, I think RCOs should be a part of this. I know that there's some RCOs that will be specifically invited. So yeah, I think RCOs should play you know, should provide their feedback for sure.
And then the final statement from Andrea, she mentioned that it seems like the fee and the code should be developed in concert. And so maybe.
Yes, totally agree. And that is sort of the plan. You know, we know that once we, you know, given the way schedules often work with city government and, you know, public utility and authority policy change, we're trying to definitely tie this together with the stormwater fees as closely as possible so that, you know, the fee, information from the fee can feed into the code needs and code needs can support, you know, projects and everything that the fee will be set to budget for. Totally agree.
Thanks, James and Kara. So that wraps up the sort of first section. And I think, James, you're on deck for the next round.
Okay, so Kara just gave you a pretty broad overview of the project itself and talked a little bit about, you know, what we've been up to and what's coming up. And I want to go through some slides here and talk about, you know, some of the more specifics of what we've been doing with this thus far and how we've been engaging folks within the city, agencies and departments, and the other groups that, you know, come in contact with and have to negotiate and navigate the codes as they are. So one of the things that we first started off with is the agency interviews. And
hey, James, I don't mean to interrupt, but would you mind, could you start the slideshow so that it's as big as people could possibly, you know, just for folks being able to see it?
Okay.
Maybe.
But it is on my screen. I don't know what you're seeing, so I'm sorry.
It's okay. Keep rolling.
What are you seeing?
I'm seeing the slide sorter to the left and your slideshow, but it's okay.
Let me try again. I'm just going to drop it and then pull it up again.
There we go.
All right. Okay, so this, agency interviews that we've been doing, we've done, I think, over 15, maybe 20 different agency groups and folks and staff from different departments across the city, as well as other agencies like County Health Department and County Conservation District, to get their sort of impressions and experiences with their engagement with city code and how they use it from a day-to-day basis, what they like about it, what they need to see, what would make their jobs and lives easier. So some of the feedback we've gotten from these surveys is broken out into basically three categories: the code itself, the technical resources that these folks need to do their job, more efficiently and effectively, and then just the process improvements for the overall stormwater plan review and approvals and permitting. So in the code, two things that came up was enhancing requirements and then consolidating the content and clarifying some of the requirements. There's often competing code requirements within the different titles of the code. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Technical resources, some of the things that, just information that folks like Kara and Marty did not have available or were not clear enough for them to give a sufficient and effective review of the stormwater plans that they were looking at. So we're going to develop more detail into those. And then the process improvements, I'll talk about that a little bit at the stormwater code approval mapping. As far as the code itself, one example of where we've seen some conflict within different titles of the code is with the definition of green infrastructure stormwater management techniques itself. The Title 13 has one definition of green infrastructure that is more of an engineering, sort of definition, that it's a practice that mimics natural processes. So this is an engineered or constructed type of definition. And then in the zoning code, green infrastructure is referred to as being, more of the sort of natural and existing natural areas, vegetated areas where water retention can happen, like our parks and greenways and such. Two examples here to illustrate that. On the left is like an R-tank system, the modular volume containment for stormwater that it gets put into a subsurface facility that would be, considered green infrastructure in our Title 13 definition. And then the Hazelwood Greenway on the other side might not be considered green infrastructure under Title 13, but under Title 9. Here we have, something that falls into that. Neither one of these definitions really suffices for everything right now. So we're going to consolidate and elaborate on these to make that much more clear. And this is just one small example of some of the conflicts and competing sort of language that's in the code that we hope to clear up. Another area was the technical resources, and the staff in the approval and review offices there in environmental planning need better information, especially concerning where they look at applications for alternative compliance under the current code for not doing the stormwater management on a particular development site due to technical infeasibilities. And, it's sort of just left to the engineer or the developer's engineer to come up with a justifiable reason why they can't do it on that particular site. There's no metric that the reviewer can go back and look at and compare to and say, well, you either meet the standard or you don't. It's very objective or subjective in that sense, and we need a more objective metric that we can tie it back to. One example that we've sort of pulled from, and this is just an infiltration waiver from the City of Philadelphia. It's a very simple form that the developer's engineer or developer can fill out and give some very specific data that is based on, you know, the technical aspects of the site and limitations that are found. And then we can use that to evaluate whether or not the infeasibility waiver is justifiable. And then finally, the process piece. In the feedback we got from a lot of the folks there were concerns over competing and various parts of the code where jurisdictional authority is either awarded or given to a certain agency, but it's not necessarily always followed through, or it's interpreted as belonging under the jurisdiction of a different agency. And there may be even places in the code where here we see, Title 13 itself, there's cities designated to do inspections during construction, but then there's also the city and PSWA are given the jurisdiction over the O&M. If it fails the inspection, then the city and PSWA are then charged with repairing and then going back and trying to get the owner to reimburse. And there's other aspects of our code where we may not even be enforcing things that are written into the code simply because of staffing limitations or because of misunderstanding amongst various departments that have sort of not quite fully interpreted the code in the proper way and are assuming that the responsibility lies with someone else just because of the confusing language. And then the other one at the bottom there in zoning code, there's the performance system that is a way for developments to get additional
density bonuses, basically.
Density bonuses, yes, thank you. The additional density bonuses based on if they increase their level of green stormwater infrastructure performance. But there's no metric actually for what qualifies and what we need to be is defined as something that has a sort of very objective number that this is how much you need to do in order to get the density bonus. Again, it's just sort of left up to interpretation. And I mentioned these processes. This is a snapshot of the stormwater approval process and within the city. And as you can see here, this sort of flow chart of the various districts that your project might be in, then the triggers for whatever size of disturbance can send you down a different path with additional approvals based on the number of square footage of disturbance. And then how that ties into the other parts of zoning code and further approvals through DOMI and PLI. This piece is part of this smaller little bubble up here with the yellow square in the upper left, and that's all part of the much larger sort of flow of the land development approval process that any development goes through with the city, and then extending to also include the Allegheny County Health Department, as well as PSWA and the additional authorities that have right-of-way or encroachment permitting that is required. So as you can see, it's not an easy path to follow. I don't think this was an easy mapping job. I applaud AKRF and the folks and thank Tom Patroni, who's on the line. And if I'm not doing this any justice, Tom, certainly I hope you will jump in and correct me. But we're trying to get our head around how things are done now and how to smooth this out and make this much more clear with all the moving parts that are involved, as you can see here with the different colors of different agencies all having their say in this matter, it gets quite complicated. Part of the technical analysis that we've embarked on with this project so far includes looking at two different aspects. One is the spatial variability of code requirements across the city, and the other is the stormwater best management practice applicability. Spatial variability in code is simply looking at the city not as blanket, smooth, one size fits all area. We're looking at this as what needs have to be met based on the stormwater issues that are within a specific area. We have areas of high risk flooding and the severe water quality and water quality issues, stream degradation, that need much more intensive stormwater management controls in place. And then there are other areas where it may not be such an issue and things are a little less intense with the impact of stormwater flows just by nature of the topography of the city of Pittsburgh. And so and the other side aspect of this was the BMP applicability, and just recognizing the fact that if we have a set standard for BMPs, which we are striving to establish, that they're not all going to apply in all situations based on the different site constraints and site requirements. So we want to have a very simple, easy way to discern which BMPs are applicable in various sites given the slope or the soils or the urban density and other conflicts that may be involved. So just a little bit more on the variability analysis, trying to identify across the city where those needs are and what level of service is being provided under current conditions with the current sewers system, and then what is needed to get to a level that is acceptable, meeting our regulatory requirements, as well as protecting health and life and safety issues during those large storm events. And to what extent of a storm event do we need to manage? And then identifying those potential policy issues, potential policies to address those issues and how they apply sort of in different ways to these different areas. And then finally, evaluating the benefits of variability in code and how maybe one area might have different cost and benefit analysis compared to another area where cost may be less to get the same level of benefits. Examples of this, just to kind of give you some idea of what we're looking at, is if we had two development sites, let's say one is in the Strip District, one is somewhere along Sawmill Run, have very different requirements and very different expectations for what they need to do to manage stormwater. The Strip District site, very urbanized, almost 100% impervious area, smaller sheds, multiple overflows that discharge to a large water body at the Allegheny River. However, some limitations on what can be discharged there because of sensitivity with recreational boating and other aspects of water quality regulations on the riverfront. Not necessarily any single-family residential areas, and this is all in a combined sewer area. The other site, looking at sites in Sawmill Run, much less density, a lot more opportunity for infiltration. However, there is significant slopes. We have a stream with total maximum daily load requirements on it that runs through the center of the Sawmill Run. And then there are restrictions with transportation issues with the busway and Route 51 there as well. So very different requirements, or very different sites, and the requirements we think should be able to address the needs for these different sites. And so a blanket code that just covers the whole city might, not be really appropriate in either one of these sites because we're going to be leaving something out that needs to be addressed. So we want to make sure we're looking at this from an aspect of what needs to be done in the different areas. The BMP analysis that we're looking at is really just to try and determine which BMPs can be used in which areas and which neighborhood typologies would work best for any given situation based on the conditions. Some examples here are, we have standard, sort of bioswale or tree pit type infiltration trench on a level area with no slope and good soils. Sure, we can do that. It's very applicable, and there are ways to make that work very simply. If it's a medium slope with still some decent soils, there may need to be some modifications that are required. And then that same technology, certainly on a steep slope or in a landslide prone area with other soil issues, we are going to just pull that one off the table and say no, that's not an BMP that would be one of the opportunities for that type of site with that type of stormwater management. So we're trying to take a very smart look at this and do this in a logical way to provide guidance for development, whether in the right of way or on private property, as to what is the most applicable and useful and effective BMPs that can be deployed in any given area. And with that, that's where we've kind of gotten to thus far. We're going to be moving through, as Kara said, to some additional stakeholder engagement to get out now that we've talked to all the agencies and authorities to find out what they need and what their opinions are. We want to get more input from the development community and the engineering and architect communities, as well as the neighborhood groups that all have to live and work with this stormwater management issues, and what they would like to see in the code, and how we can make this process better and easier and simpler for everybody overall. So with that, I'll leave it there, and happy to take questions. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, James. There are a couple of questions in here. It's again from Susan. Are you recommending a process for regular review and update of BMPs?
Seems like a good idea. Maybe with the developer's manual that gets updated yearly, right?
Yeah, our developer's manual does get updated yearly. It's something that we know is the technologies are changing very quickly on a lot of these things, and it's something that it's very easy to put out a guide and recommendations and design specifications and then be like, there, we're done, let it go. But I think, yeah, there will be a regular review of these. I don't know that that's something that gets written into code or is required, but it's one of these process pieces that we'll have to talk about. So hopefully, Tom can be taking notes on that right now.
Yeah, maybe we have to not get too detailed in code so we don't write ourselves into being dated in a year or two.
There aren't any questions right now anywhere, but I have one, so I might pose it since I have a minute. I wonder if the two of you can think of a way that this code and ordinance update would have an impact on people, like community members' lives in Pittsburgh, right? So some of this stuff is not something that people encounter every day, but when you're finished with it, what's its impact on community members that they might see sort of on the ground?
Well, hopefully over time they see better stormwater management, more green infrastructure, less flooding in general. But of course, that only happens through development because this is a development code.
Yeah, I mean, our goal here is to write a code that is sufficient enough for our needs that will, as Kara said, just begin to chip away at that repeated problem of stormwater flooding in certain areas, so that we can have as the city is redeveloped, that's it's a slow process, but if we don't start requiring these things now, then 10 years we're still going to be talking about the same thing and nothing's changed. So as far as improvement to the communities, it's I don't know all the legal aspects of writing code and the land use, and getting that stuff written into it. But we're really looking at this as a way to get ourselves on the right path to a 21st century stormwater code that not only looks at limiting the flooding that we're having now, but hopefully is forward looking into the future storm patterns and what we're expecting to see with the intensity and frequency of our rainfall.
Yeah, and I think developers that work in other cities, New York, DC, they're kind of used to stricter development codes. And I think they come here and they're like, oh, this is all we have to do? Okay. But on the other hand, for local developers, new restrictions could be a real challenge. So I think we're going to have to work with a broad range of stakeholders to get the right, the right fit for Pittsburgh. And I also think that one thing that we should try to push through this is that green infrastructure actually leads us to see some green, because as we saw in James' presentation, the definition of green infrastructure is confusing. In Philly and here, for lack of better guidance, we oftentimes approve those underground R tanks because it is infiltration and it does a lot of the jobs of green infrastructure, but it's not really providing the community benefits of trees and landscape and vegetation. So hopefully we can think about that through the process too.
Awesome. There is another question here from Gavin, and he is saying it's maybe a little bit more utility related, but is there consideration for incentivizing investment in more BMP applicable areas as part of the infiltration waiver request process or some other mechanism?
Well, I think, once we have a stormwater fee, that will certainly help us to, to use that as a way to incentivize more stormwater management, source control, and site management for, and having some sort of additional, like we talked about with the density bonus, having some sort of additional bonus for green infrastructure and other community, beneficial community components that can be added to the project, or maybe fast tracking permitting approvals if they include certain BMPs that are above and beyond what we have for our standard. Those are all things that we're looking at and we'll be trying to get our heads around as this moves forward.
Yeah, and for those, oh, sorry, Gavin, were you going to say something?
Just if I could clarify, I know there are some requirements for stormwater management on property in some other cities. They're allowing for that requirement to be satisfied elsewhere. So if you can't do it on your site, you can invest in another site. And I don't know if that's been thought of at all.
Yeah, it has. So good question. And by the way, our density bonuses that we have now, they are in the Uptown district and the Riverfront district, pretty much just because those are the most recent zoning updates where we were trying to be a little bit more progressive and push, stormwater management as a goal.
Kara,
not necessarily.
Sorry, could you define a density bonus?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry for being,
It's your world.
Jargony.
It's cool.
No, I hate that. I don't want to be like that. So thank you. Okay, density bonuses. It's the idea of incentivized zoning. So you can write something into the zoning code that's not necessarily like the stick or the base requirement, but it's an incentive, it's a carrot. If you go above and beyond the base requirements of the zoning, you can get development bonuses. And usually it ends up being density, because if you go above there's usually a maximum density that a developer is able to build to in a given area. And if you raise the allowable density a little bit, if they do something good that the community wants, like more stormwater management or, you know, community parks or something like that, then they can get more density, and that means more profits for developers. So it's usually density, it could be something else, but that's the gist of it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we have these density bonuses in Uptown and Riv, but that's not necessarily like geographically or geologically the best place for green infrastructure. So I think that's an interesting point and question of, can we incentivize it in other areas? And we have started to look into the possibility of a credit trading system. In fact, we had a long meeting about it the other day. We have, it worked out really nicely. We have an intern from Chatham, and his thesis, he's a grad student, and his thesis is on stormwater credit trading systems. So he's working with us, and AKRF is also has a lot of good experience in establishing these kinds of credit trading models, which seems like a stretch from what we have now, but if we could implement it in the right way, it, you know, could hopefully get to that idea.
Cool. So we should probably wrap up soon because it's 6:02, but Marty did put into the chat something about performance points, chapter 915 in city code, but I don't know what that means. So Marty or Kara.
Marty, step in. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that that's the part of the code where you can achieve those points, those performance points. So it's rainwater, energy usage, other things like that. That's where that is in the code for those that are interested.
And we have like a little bit of parameters around it, but not really enough for it to be successful.
And so people can probably find the different codes online, right?
Yes. We like to use MuniCode, an online municipal code compilation website. But also, if you go to the website, I can share my screen if that would be good. But anyway, if you,
Go ahead. I think that maybe in an email after the fact, we could send it to the participants, but also Kara, if you could pop it into the chat so people can get it, because I don't know that we have everyone's email address.
Right. Okay, I'll do that.
Wonderful. And so with that, unless there is something else that folks are interested in asking a question around, or, you know, providing input here, and I'll just.
I'm sorry. Could I just
one more time? Go ahead.
I will put my email in the chat here, and if you'd like to get more involved with these task force things and are not yet engaged, I assume most people, this is how they found out about it. But if not, please feel free to reach out.
Okay, we'll let Gavin just pop in his email in there. So thanks again so much, James and Kara, and everyone else who asked questions and provided support. This was very interesting and helpful. It's nice to get, we've been hearing about this for a little while, so it's nice to hear from you both. We really appreciate that. And so I too, though, wanted to just make a plug for everyone who's on the call. Gavin, would you pop the wade into Park Waters in the chat too? That we have, you know, these opportunities for learning coming up through the month of June, and the next one will be run by Biohabitats, and they'll be talking about green infrastructure examples, but they're now calling it living infrastructure in some regards. And so that's happening next Wednesday. And then the following Monday, again, PWSA staff members Beth and Rebecca, who are both on this call, will be presenting about the stormwater utility, and that's at 6 o'clock. So that information we'll get into the chat. And I wonder, Beth or Rebecca, do you have anything that you want to add about that presentation before we wrap up for the evening?
I guess one option is if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask in advance, if you could forward them to Erin, that would be useful for us, and it would help us guide our presentation so it's of most use to all the listeners.
Wonderful. And also Gavin and I work together and collaborate all the time. I'm putting my email in there, but any Parks Conservancy member will get us the emails, and we'll get them to Beth. Okay, well, gosh, thanks very much again, and thank you to all of the participants for being on this call and, you know, spending a beautiful part of your evening with us to learn a little bit more about the Stormwater Code and ordinance updates. And
Yeah, and this was helpful for us too, to you know, see what people are interested in learning more about and that kind of thing. So thank you, Parks Conservancy, and Erin and Gavin. I know you and others have done a lot to organize this, so thank you.
No problem. Happy to do it. Wonderful. Thanks again. We'll see you all the next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.